The human cost of World War II. World War II remains the deadliest conflict in human history, a devastating event that shaped our world in unimaginable ways. Between 1939 and 1945, an estimated 80 million lives were lost, accounting for nearly 3% of the global population at the time. For 6 long years, the world witnessed unprecedented levels of violence, destruction, and human suffering. This devastating loss of life wasn't limited to the battlefield. Civilians became targets, cities were razed to the ground, and an unfathomable number of innocent people were left displaced, traumatized, or killed. World War II forces us to reflect not only on humanity's capacity for destruction, but also on the resilience and sacrifices of countless individuals. In this video, we'll explore the causes, aftermath, and most importantly, the human cost of World War II so that we may never forget the lessons history has to teach us. Wars rarely erupt overnight. The seeds of World War II were planted years before the first shots were fired. The Treaty of Versailles, signed at the end of World War I, imposed heavy reparations on Germany, leaving its economy crippled and its people resentful. Amid this turmoil, Adolf Hitler rose to power by exploiting public anger and promoting a dangerous ideology, one that sought to divide the world along racial and nationalistic lines. At the same time, authoritarian regimes were gaining momentum globally. Fascist Italy, under Benito Mussolini, and militarist Japan added fuel to the fire, each pursuing expansionist ambitions. The refusal of democratic nations to intervene early on, lessons not learned from the previous war, allowed these regimes to grow dangerously unchecked. By 1939, tensions boiled over. Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, demonstrating Hitler's intention to reshape Europe's borders by force. Within days, Britain and France declared war. What followed was a conflict unlike any the world had ever seen. The early years of World War II were marked by blitzkrieg, or lightning warfare, where German forces overwhelmed much of Europe with speed and sheer force. Poland fell in mere weeks, and soon, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and France suffered similar fates. The war quickly expanded beyond Europe. Japan, already entrenched in a brutal conflict with China, aligned itself with Germany and Italy. Their shared goal of domination created a global conflict, pulling many nations into the fray. World War II wasn't limited to a single continent. It unfurled across multiple fronts: Europe, North Africa, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific, and Asia. Both the Axis and Allied powers mobilized their economies and resources, dragging millions into the war effort. In Europe, key battles like Stalingrad turned the tide against the Axis, marking the resilience of Soviet forces against overwhelming odds. Across the Atlantic and Pacific, naval and aerial warfare reached new heights, culminating in major confrontations such as the Battle of Midway and the D-Day invasion at Normandy. Battles raged on land, at sea, and in the skies, with devastating consequences for all involved. For the soldiers on the ground, the war was nothing short of hell. Trench warfare, aerial bombings, and relentless combat took an unimaginable toll on human life. Soldiers in the bitter cold of the Eastern Front or the humid jungles of the Pacific endured conditions that pushed them to their physical and emotional limits. The fallout from war extended far beyond the battlefield. Civilians in cities under siege faced constant bombings, food shortages, and the looming threat of occupation. In London, the Blitz left tens of thousands dead, while in cities like Stalingrad, entire communities were wiped out as the front lines changed hands. The war didn't just affect those fighting on the front lines, it permeated the everyday lives of millions at home. Women stepped out of traditional roles and entered factories to produce ammunition, vehicles, and supplies critical to the war effort, while children grew up in shadowed fear of air raids. In cities around the world, rationing became a new way of life. Food, fuel, and everyday necessities were in short supply as nations prioritized military needs over civilian consumption. Families navigated uncertainty, loss, and displacement, further underscoring the heavy burden of war on the home front. World War II's death toll wasn't just the result of battles. It was exacerbated by humanity's darkest impulses. The Holocaust remains one of the most horrifying chapters of the war. Millions of Jews, as well as Romani people, disabled individuals, political dissidents, and others, were rounded up, brutalized, and systematically murdered. The industrial scale of genocide carried out in concentration camps is a harrowing reminder of what happens when hatred is allowed to fester. Beyond Europe, atrocities were committed across Asia. The Nanjing massacre saw hundreds of thousands of civilians tortured and killed by Japanese forces. Forced labor, sexual enslavement, and indiscriminate killings left scars on communities across the continent. These acts of cruelty targeted the vulnerable without mercy. They amplified the war's death toll and served as a sobering reminder of the depths of human cruelty. The scale of death in World War II is difficult to comprehend. Military casualties on both sides numbered in the tens of millions. Entire regiments were lost in battles, with many soldiers never returning home. For civilians, the war was even deadlier. Bombings, diseases, and starvation claimed countless lives. Entire towns and villages were wiped off the map during campaigns of scorched earth warfare. In countries like Poland and the Soviet Union, millions of lives were lost to violence and neglect. Every life lost carried its own story, the story of someone's friend, parent, or child. These losses left families broken and communities permanently altered. The war caused profound political and social shifts that reshaped countries and alliances. Democratic and authoritarian powers fought fiercely, and in the end, the world's balance would shift dramatically. The Allied powers, led by the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, came out victorious. But the war exposed fault lines that would lead to new conflicts, including the Cold War. Propaganda also played a significant role in mobilizing populations. Governments used radio, newspapers, and posters to frame their narratives and drum up support. With so much at stake, controlling public perception became a weapon as powerful as any tank or plane. The final years of the war brought new horrors. As Nazi Germany's forces crumbled, the Allies pushed deeper into Europe, liberating concentration camps and uncovering the full extent of the Holocaust. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered, marking victory in Europe VE Day. But even as celebrations erupted, the war raged on in the Pacific. The United States' decision to use atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 brought the war to a sudden and tragic end. While these bombings forced Japan's surrender, they resulted in the loss of over 200,000 lives, underscoring the catastrophic power of new weaponry. When the guns fell silent, the world was left to pick up the pieces. Millions were displaced from destroyed homes, leading to a refugee crisis of unimaginable proportions. Cities like Warsaw, Berlin, and Tokyo were in ruins, with entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. The Nuremberg trials attempted to deliver justice by holding those responsible for war crimes accountable. But for many survivors, no tribunal could ever undo the trauma and grief left in the war's wake. What can we learn from such an immense tragedy? Above all, World War II teaches us the devastating cost of war. The lives lost, the bonds broken, and the scars left on mankind. It underscores the need for diplomatic solutions, unity, and vigilance against hate and division. Moreover, it reminds us of the extraordinary acts of courage and resilience demonstrated by those who lived through it. The stories of resistance fighters, civilians risking their lives to save others, and soldiers fighting for freedom highlight humanity's capacity for hope in the darkest of times. World War II is far more than a page in history books. It's a cautionary tale for every generation. As we remember the 80 million lives lost, we honor their memory by committing ourselves to never repeat the mistakes of the past. Our collective responsibility as humanity is to ensure peace and protect the dignity of all people. In remembering World War II, we not only pay tribute to those who suffered and survived, but also strengthen our resolve to create a more compassionate and united world. The cost of war is far too high, let us never forget.